Hi, perhaps you recognize me. It's your favorite president.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
I mean,
We know you want to ban our national flags, but we're going to wave you goodbye.
What does confrontational mean? It means you'll fight for what you believe.
Enough was enough! And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother!
It is not merely our privilege to be strong, it is our duty to be strong.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp. Thank you for everyone who is watching this live on YouTube, Rumble and Facebook. If you are watching live, you can contribute to today's conversation in the chat, or at some point I'll put the StreamYard link in the chat for you to call in, possibly ask a question or make a comment. Please do so. I love hearing from the audience, especially your comments and questions. It's always very insightful. If you are watching this later, you can also comment afterwards. Please do so, and please share, like, and subscribe to all our platforms everywhere, mainly on Rumble, but we are also on all social media as well. So let's kick things off like I always do, and that's by letting you know how you can support us here at Commanding the Narrative. It is by going to Buy Me a Coffee. And if you want to go to Buy Me a Coffee and throw us a few dollars, it does help to pay for the live stream, also the website. And most importantly, it gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling inside. So that is very important. If you do want to support us, Buy Me a Coffee is the best way. If you want to keep up to date with everything, please head to commandingthenarrative.com. Very easy to remember, commandingthenarrative.com. You can keep up to date with all the latest podcasts we do, either the Commanding the Narrative, Ex-Candidates, Global Discussion Forum, any articles that I might write or have published somewhere, and also events, any events that are coming up. You can find that all on Commanding the Narrative. One of the events that is coming up is this important event that is being hosted by the National Rational Energy Network. It's in Cronulla this Sunday. It's called Save Our Coast. It's going to be focused on the offshore wind project that is happening south of Cronulla in the Illawarra. Now, what NREN are trying to achieve by hosting this event in Cronulla is to get some support from Sydney people about what's happening in Cronulla with these offshore wind projects, and really raise awareness about the projects and everything that comes along with it. There's also going to be a presentation by Dr. Adi Patterson about nuclear energy. Grant Piper, the chairman of the National Rational Energy Network, is also going to be speaking along with a host of other speakers. It's a free event, so if you're in Cronulla, it's going to be at the Cronulla RSL Club. Head to the Eventbrite page. I'll put the link in the description and secure your free ticket. We'd love to see you there. And also, lastly, if you want to support free speech and open information, head to the Light Australia website, lightaustralia.com, and sign up to be a distributor. It doesn't have it up on this page at the moment, but there is a new edition of the Light hitting the stands very, very soon, and in the next couple of days, in fact. So if you want to be a distributor, head to the Light Australia. We do rely on everyday people to distribute the Light. It is free for the public. If you are close to the Northern Beaches, there's a pallet that is paid for. We only need people to get it out there. Just call the number 0406 861 816 and sign up to be a distributor. It would be much appreciated, just to get unfiltered truth out there, unfiltered information. And with misinformation and disinformation legislation looming, this may be the last chance we have to get information out there. I say it every time. So if you can help, please do so. Now, on today's episode, we've got a gentleman that I met at the Environment and Energy Forum at Guildford. He's written a book called Australia's Looming Energy Crisis. You may have heard this gentleman on Ben Fordham's 2GB podcast program not long ago. He was the man who said that the Snowy Hydro 2 will never produce any energy. So that was a very interesting comment. We may expand on that a little bit today, but let's bring him on. Alan Lawrenson, welcome to Commanding the Narrative.
Thanks very much, Stephen.
Now, first, before we get into why you wrote the book and a little bit about the book, what's your background? How did you get to this point?
Okay, I sort of regard myself as a technocrat. I spent almost 50 years working in science and medical technology. I originally trained as a chemist, a metallurgical chemist. I worked in the automotive industry for Volkswagen as a metallurgist. I've been exposed to many aspects of science, including nuclear technology, for a year. I've got some graduate management studies completed at University of Macquarie and other places, and the like. I was also, the last working job I had was a head of a peak industry body called Science Industry Australia, and I also had some exposure personally to the oil and gas industry as an investor. In fact, I was lucky enough the first hole we drilled, private hole we drilled, we hit an oil reservoir, which made things pretty exciting for a while. So I've got a fair bit of knowledge there. And I've also written 3 international best-selling books on prostate cancer as a cancer sufferer. And I spent 3 months in Korea at the National Cancer Centre having treatment on some technology, on a machine that we yet do not still have in Australia.
So talking about prostate cancer and then talking about Australia's energy network, that's a big leap to go from those two things. How did you get to the point where you were writing a book about energy?
Well, I've got 3 wonderful young granddaughters between 3 and 7. My wife and I came to live here from South Africa in 1979. The country then was a country of what I term as milk and honey and great economic opportunity. And I've seen that slowly decline over the years. And by the way, my view is that without low-cost energy, the chance of those days coming back are lesser if we don't have low-cost energy. And the way things are going, we see energy becoming more and more expensive all the time. That excited me, and I also made a submission to the opposition-sponsored nuclear ban in the Senate. That was 2 years ago. And I made a submission to that, and I was encouraged by one of Australia's best mining analysts. He said, well, I didn't think you had as much knowledge as you do. Why don't you write a book about it? And 8 months later, I've produced a 500-page book, working 14 hours a day. Very intense. I read 500 reports to get the data that I didn't have already on hand to present a very comprehensive book. And by the way, the mantra of the book is, can we keep the lights on?
Yes. And it's interesting that you brought up South Africa because at the moment they're rationing their power. They can't keep their lights on because of the energy policies that they've had throughout the last few decades. What are your thoughts on that? Obviously, you said when you left South Africa, it was the land of milk and honey.
Well, I was saying no, Australia, when I arrived in Australia, Australia was the land of milk and honey. When I left South Africa, it was still in the apartheid regime, and things were declining, let's put it that way.
Yeah,
economically and opportunity-wise. And crime was growing.
At that point in time, it was comparable to Australia in terms of technology and those sorts of things. 100%,
very similar. In fact, I go so far as to say South Africa at that time was, in fact, somewhat more advanced than Australia, because with the apartheid, they expected sanctions, increasing sanctions, to the point, for instance, they built fighter jets in Johannesburg, or just outside Johannesburg. They had a factory producing fighter jets. Now, I can't see Australia producing a fighter jet at any time.
Well, that's why I say it's a crystal ball, because we can see what's happened to South Africa, where they've come from to where they are at now. If we think that it can't happen here, I don't think that's very intelligent. Like, we need to take this very, very seriously. We can look at South Africa and learn from their experience and say, we don't want that to happen here, so we need to change our course.
Yes. I mean, South Africa at the moment has 2 nuclear reactors in just opposite Table Mountain at Coburg, and they've had those for some years. They've had some challenges. One was off the air for 12 months due to technical issues. But they've got 30-odd operating coal-fired power stations, but they've been underinvested, undercapitalised as far as maintenance is concerned in the mine. And the reliability of their stations has got so poor due to corruption and all sorts of other things that that's why they are in a energy drought and do have load shedding. Now, load shedding is every day, almost everywhere.
Yes, yeah. Now, let's dive into your book. Now, you've got this presentation here and you've got the table of contents. Do you want to dive into this presentation and we'll comment as we go through?
There's some interesting things come out of it, hopefully, but that's, you can see from the contents, it's pretty comprehensive. The 6 chapters on nuclear near the end, and I then summarise, can we keep the lights on and finding better ways to proceed than what we are at the moment? And of course, I look at solar, wind, energy storage, battery technology, and the whole gamut, and look at coal and gas and see where we are in that situation, as well as expose the regulatory regime in which we're in. And of course, the 2 key government targets, we should start there, to the point that the government had legislated that we get greenhouse gases emissions reduced by 43% by 2030. And of course, 82% of our energy to be from renewables by 20. Those are both in law, as you can see on your screen in front of you. And that requires us to install 22,000 solar panels a day, every day for 365 days a year. And then to add a new wind turbine every 18 hours. Neither are achievable. It is physically impossible.
Let's be clear about that. So they want 82% of our energy to come from renewables by 2030. We are very, very close to 2025. That's 5 years away. There's no way we're going to be able to reach this target, is there?
In my view, I don't think we will, but more importantly, people that really are active in the field as professional engineers, who've got years of experience. I've talked to many of them before in the preparation of my book, and even subsequently, once the book has been out and they've read a copy, they are of the view it cannot be done. I mean, people like Paul Broad, who was the CEO of Snowy Hydro Company, who had a fallout with Minister Byrne and left. He said it can't be done, and other well-known dignitaries, even Westergreen, the top emo man, suggests that we need more capital to fund what has to be done to meet those 2 targets. So it is challenging. And if you just looked at our emo call for 16 terawatt hours of solar and wind energy by June last year, and a top energy academic at the University of New South Wales said it's probably about 8.5 to 9 terawatts was actually installed. So you see a big gap, and every year the gap seems to get somewhat bigger. So it is challenging from that point of view. So, but can I say, when I dug into the government plan, I was very skeptical about it to start with. But when I started to really look at the nuts and bolts of the plan, I found it quite well integrated. And it covers a lot of good stuff, good interesting ground. And by the way, it was a lot better than the fiasco of 9 years of the coalition government, who flip-flopped about what they were doing about Paris and all sorts of other things, and didn't really have a coherent energy plan, in my view. But looking at the bad aspects of the government plan, clearly the time frame that they've set themselves is, I don't think will allow us to attain what they wish us to attain or legislate. And it's also inflationary.
I agree with that. I think their theory is sound, but I think the time, as you said, the time frame and also the cost is just unachievable.
The cost is unbelievable.
And plus, I don't have much faith in the battery technology either.
Well, can I say about battery technology? And I've got a whole chapter on that. So I go into some of the new chemistries which are not yet commercially available, but are coming out of research labs. There will be vast improvements in the battery technology space. But when we're talking about the level of the quantity of power that has to be stored for large periods of time, you're talking about mega cost, even if you're using technologies that might be battery technologies that might be cheaper than the present time. The whole thing is very, very challenging. And you can nowhere in the world is a advanced economy existing upon renewables alone, which is what the government are basically planning.
Mm. So you've got here the good and the bad, which we've just touched on. Except you, do you want to touch on nuclear here? You said that we're in the nuclear 2.0.
Well, we are. There's going to be a massive explosion. And by the way, that's a bad word to use when you talk about nuclear, because everybody's concerned about those type of issues. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying a massive growth in nuclear around the world. I think there'll be 1,000 nuclear systems installed before 2040 around the world. Now, the vast majority of those will be micro nuclear stations, which were smaller than SMRs. SMRs go up to about 300 megawatts in output. The micro ones are typically 10 to 20. They're used at remote sites like mining sites and so forth and so on. One of the players called Last Energy, I refer to him in my book. I've got a whole chapter about this. They've already got 51 firm orders for their micro plants, and these things are less than $1 million each. And they will start delivering the first one in 2029. And there's over 100 firm orders. And I noticed in the last few days, Rolls-Royce have secured their first firm order for their 440 megawatt SMR from the Czech government. So we're going
to be left behind if we don't jump on this.
Absolutely, in my view, and it is basically it's emission close to emission free. Nothing's free because they use a lot of concrete and so forth and so on. So in the manufacture of the nuclear SMRs, or not so much SMRs, but major nuclear power plants, there's quite a lot of material that's used that does create emissions.
That's the case with all energy systems.
It's the case with everything. The poles and the wires and everything else all got to be mined, all got to be moved to site and so forth and so on. Yeah. So that's where that is. So we are the only G20 country without nuclear power. And I find it crazy because Australia are innovators. I found when I came to Australia, Australia adopts new technology before almost any country in the world, and adopted wholeheartedly. And we just don't see that happening here. And it's because of political ideology and scare campaigns. And as I noted yesterday, the Labor government in federal government have announced a new inquiry into nuclear to report by the 30th of April. Now, if that isn't telling them that the population are amenable to nuclear power, there's focus groups that's telling them that, and therefore they've decided they've got to do something about it. So I'm not suggesting the floodgate's going to open, the law is going to be changed. Because, by the way, we don't only have federal legislation against nuclear. We have a number of the states ban, for instance, New South Wales bans even exploration for uranium.
But as you said, the politicians won't go against the tide of the public support. So we could see those bans being lifted very, very quickly. But let's jump into the plan. So this is the government's current plan of moving to this energy transition. Sure.
By the way, solar is the outstanding achievement of the last 5 to 10 years. We've got we're approaching 4 million homes that have solar, and increasing numbers are, in fact, putting in battery systems so they can capture the stuff for use in the evening when the sun's gone down, and to charge their EVs if they have EVs and so forth. So that has been a great success. But also the problem that you face, the more and more solar you bring into the grid, the more difficult it is to maintain the 50 hertz cycle that you need to make sure that no appliances and other things attached to the grid are in fact damaged. It's a very critical thing, and it's a very difficult thing. And as your percentage of renewables, particularly solar, come onto the market, it's more and more difficult to control.
And my understanding is during the middle of the day when the sun's shining and these rooftop solar panels are producing a lot of energy, there's excess energy in the grid. But the problem is you can't dial back the coal plants or turn them off because it takes them so long to start up again. And you need them running at night when solar isn't producing electricity. So what it's really doing, it's driving the wholesale price of electricity down, which makes the production of electricity from the coal plants more expensive. They're not going to just incur that cost. They have to pass it on to the consumer. So in a lot of ways, these solar panels on rooftops is making coal production more expensive. Have you come across that?
Well, there's a magic word, and the word is called curtailment. And on the 1st, I think from memory, the 1st of September this year, only a few weeks back, 79.2% of the solar panel output was curtailed. In other words, couldn't be used. That's in major solar farms. I'm not talking about rooftop. I'm talking about utility scale solar, which is now quite a lot of. There's many dozens around Australia. 79.2% of the power went to waste, couldn't be used, and the like. So it's a real problem. They've got no solution. They have yet not got an adequate solution to store the output so it can be used at a later date.
And that's why people say we only need baseload power, and that's
absolutely critical to have baseload. We can't run a modern, sophisticated manufacturing economy without it. Now, we've lost a lot of our manufacturing over the last 20 or 30 years, but we're very innovative people. We've got great researchers, and we can have a solid manufacturing. I spent 10 years running a peak industry body, and one of our key reasons for being was to try and commercialize research coming out of universities and find commercial partners. I spent a lot of time doing that. And so we've got the ideas to make things, but obviously we've got labor cost challenges, but high technology products can be made in Australia. We just need low energy costs because everything needs energy these days for production or to produce the componentry or whatever.
So the next thing is that you talk about is wind. What are your comments here with wind?
Well, wind, I'm very perturbed about the damage to our landscape or offshore seascape as far as wind is concerned. And by the way, all these now are pretty well made. Most of these things are now made from a competitive point of view, are made in China. The European manufacturers are having challenges to be competitive against Chinese. And of course, to get them into position on land, there's a massive amount of destruction of natural habitat, being bulldozing roads to get them onto the hilltops and so forth and so on. And then there's the poles and wires. And the poles and wires have major challenges, and the farmers don't want them. And the exclusion zones under the wires and to the left and right of the wires and the like are very onerous. Sure, they get some compensation, but it doesn't compensate them enough for the actual the potential loss in the capital value of the farm in the first instance. So there are many challenges. So they produce, on land ones do produce modestly competitive priced electricity. The ones offshore are much larger and very much more expensive and have a lot more output. And they have one real advantage in as much that you can, because they're situated in the ocean, you can bring along the seabed the power cables to where the power is needed. So if you have them up, for instance, at Port Stephens, you could use that power in Sydney by bringing an undersea cable with that electrical output to Sydney without poles and wire issues and so forth. Now, having said that, the cost of electricity generated by offshore becomes much more marginal. And my understanding is that, for instance, down south of Sydney, they are talking about installing floating wind turbines. Many of those around the world. And that's another challenge, or a risk factor in this whole equation.
I think the largest one around the world is 11 turbines in America.
Yes.
So they're talking about having hundreds of these floating turbines in the Illawarra. And
that's my understanding. Well, I say hundreds. It's a very large number. I can't remember the exact figure.
I think it's close to about 200 turbines in an area over 1,000 square kilometers. And you brought up the cables. I'm a little bit concerned with the cables, because they're finding in America, Michael Schallenberger did a documentary on this where 60 whales had rocked up dead on the shore after they installed their offshore wind project. And they say the sound and the vibrations caused by these cables in the water, floating beneath the water, is really damaging the whales and leading to them dying. So the offshore wind project in the Illawarra apparently is within a whale migration corridor. There doesn't seem to be any consideration happening around this. So, what are your thoughts?
Okay, I have seen some of the work that I've read of Mike Schallenberger's, some of the things he's said about that, but I can't verify that. And I did dig into it at the time when I was writing the book, and it was pretty inconclusive what was causing marine life, damage to marine life. I mean, one of the key issues originally was that these things were going to be mounted on the sea floor, and on that basis, all the seismic work they'd have to do to determine whether the ocean floor was suitable for anchoring points and so forth would obviously disturb the wildlife. Having said that, the same thing applies perhaps off the northwest shelf of Australia with Woodside when they're developing some of their infrastructure for LNG. But of course, they do that work in the season when there's no whales in the area, because these things, the whales migrate up the coast and then they spawn the young and then they come down the coast, and there's months in between that. So you do a lot of that work when there's no whales in the area at all. So it's a red herring from that point of view as far as the activists are concerned. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything you want to touch on wind before we move on to the next one?
Well, can I say that the big problem onshore in the main is severe as far as the deaths of birds and bats and the like. I've seen figures by the way, I was unable to totally verify it, but I saw a figure of 29 million birds being killed in Spain per year. If that figure is true, it's just staggering. And in fact, in America, the American, the emblem of America is the eagle, and they forced the American onshore wind farms to put software on them to sense the approach of eagles in flight. And to the point that when they sense them within 1 kilometre, the wind turbine, in fact, ceases operation. And they've been known to stop 90 times a day. So how much output are you getting to protect the eagle? So there's many, many little nasty things. So perhaps we could do better by having a nice big hunk of a nuclear power station in the Hunter Valley or somewhere to avoid the need for these things.
Yeah, and I would assume there's birds out with these offshore wind turbines as well that you would have to consider. But
of course,
yeah.
It applies to offshore as well. But I can't quantify that. It's very difficult. There's smoke and mirrors going on when you try to research some of these things, because there's always there's the for and against. And you're trying to find the line of truth between the two is sometimes quite difficult.
Yeah, definitely. Now, hydro. Now, this is probably.
Can I just say one last thing before we go off the wind? We've got 4,100 turbines running in Australia, with one going in every 18 hours, supposedly, but we're only doing it about every 12 or 13 hours, that's my understanding at the moment. By 2050, we're going to have 17,100. So look forward to that. If the present government policy is retained and sustained.
Yeah, where do you put them all? That's the big question. Okay. Now, hydro, specifically talking about the Snowy Hydro 2 is probably what you're most famous for because of that Ben Fordham interview. What do you have to say about hydro?
Okay, well, Snowy scheme is one of the engineering marvels of this world, the original Snowy scheme. It's renowned all over the world by hydro engineers and electrical engineers as far as the quality of what was done. And obviously it was built over quite a long period of time. It was a lot of migrant labour. A lot of it came from Italy, by the way. And by the way, I live in Concord, and I'm talking to you from Concord in Sydney. And my golf club just up the road, 2/3 of the names are of Italian origin, because they are the grandkids of people that came out to work on the Snowy Hydro, which was a massively successful scheme. Snowy 2.0, Mr. Turnbull's initiative, with a budget of $2 billion, he said, is real challenging. The latest costs are somewhere around 13 million, and then there's some extra millions going to be probably required because it's uncertain.
You said 13 million. You mean 13 billion, right?
Sorry, I slipped the tongue. I meant billion. Yeah. 13 billion is, and on top of that, there will be some extra costs for maybe putting some cables underground and the cost of cabling to bring that power to the markets where it's needed. So it's a real challenge. Florence, the boring machine, which is, by the way, roughly 2,500 tons, and I think it's 134 meters long or thereabouts, and the viewers can see it on the screen as a photograph of Florence. It's been stuck, and once was stuck for 9 months. It dropped into a hole because it was very soft ground, and the weight of the thing went into, caused a sinkhole almost, and took it 9 months to get it out. And they've done about 1 kilometre, and now they've decided to buy one or more because they've got 15 kilometres to go. So I said during that Ben Fordham interview that I didn't think it would produce any power. But being government funded, us all as taxpayers paying for it, they'll keep doling the cash into Snowy Hydro to make it happen. But if it was a privately owned entity, it would have been canned already, because they didn't do enough geology they did some to determine that the actual path in which they're drilling those tunnels, to determine the ground conditions that they're going to drill into. Some of it, the rock was the hardest rock in Australia, and some of it was really shaly type stuff, which was very soft and also made it very difficult to do. And they're now using ultra high pressure water ahead of Florence to try and break up some of the high strength rock. So they didn't do enough of that work. They did some for sure. That's out of the mouth of a employee engineer on the project. He told me that directly. And so whether it'll produce, whether it'll complete, probably will. I've changed my view a little since talking to Ben in May, that it will continue to be completed. But it's also only a backup system. It's only going to be used when we have a shortfall in the grid, input into the grid.
And just imagine all the emissions it's taking to construct this thing. You know, it's not only is it over budget, it's over schedule.
Yeah.
And when we're meant to be reducing emissions, and then they say, "Oh, but we can't have nuclear energy."
Yes,
but we're doing projects like this.
Not a good idea. And as I said, but by the way, my remarks got me onto a number of TV programs, and I had many interviews the following 48, 72 hours, and my book sales went through the roof. So from that, I believed that honestly at the time, and since I've done some more work looking into it, and I've moderated my view to the point that the government will keep spending until it's finished. Doesn't matter how much it costs. And the good old taxpayer will just keep forking out cash.
It's scary, isn't it? It's really scary.
Yep. Sorry, we're going on to pumped hydro, I think.
Okay. So you wanted the Snowy 2.0. So you finished with
yeah, I think that covers that pretty well.
So the next one's hydrogen.
Okay. Well, it's gone out of fashion the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks. You saw there was a major decision made by Origin to walk away from the Hunter Valley hub that was with big money that was put on the table by the feds in recent months to build a significant entity in the Undervalley, and Origin have walked away from it. I haven't seen what Orica have said because they were joint partners in the project. The issue with hydrogen will not work economically unless you can get the price of green hydrogen, that's for making steel and so forth and so on, unless you can get the price down to a very much more competitive level. It's about $6 per kilogram at the moment, and you've really got to get down to $1.50. And by the way, Biden has got a subsidy of something like $3.50, I think, US, for production of hydrogen in the United States from his Inflation Reduction Act. And the like. Now, there's one technology which I have, and I must say I have a small investment portfolio, and one of the shares is a company called Hazer, and they have a very interesting low-emission, low-cost methane pyrolysis system, and they've got some significant partners internationally who are watching the development of their pilot plant, which has been operating successfully now for some months. And that promises to have hydrogen produced for under $1 per kilogram. So if that technology is scaled up and works satisfactorily from a pilot plant to an industrial plant, and people like POSCO, which is who own Hyundai and Kia, and the biggest shipbuilders in the world, if that technology works, and that's one of their partners who are working with them, and if that does materialize, it might, green energy and green steel might come to pass, but years down the track.
But a lot of these projects, so for example, the hydrogen project, some of the wind turbine projects, I mean, they get government subsidies for these projects, and then these projects fall over. Do they have to pay these subsidies back, or they just keep the money and waltz on to the next project?
The word commercial in confidence comes to the fore very quickly in that discussion. You have no real idea. And by the way, also, it's very fashionable for the control of the entities that have those subsidies changes quite regularly. They're on-sold to other investors. And to follow the ownership and whether we've got Chinese ownership of a lot of these assets, which is potentially undesirable. And that's why the EU brought in legislation to make more critical minerals from Western sources rather than buying them all from China for strategic reasons.
And while this is all going on, we've got a comment here from Margaret. She says, I have been getting worse power bills than ever before. It is ridiculous, especially when you are on a very low income. And I heard electricity is going up again. This increase in electricity prices, do you see it turning around or stabilizing, or is it just going to keep going up?
I'm sad to say it's going to continue to go up, because I did mention there, like solar. When the more and more solar, because we don't have adequate storage for utility scale solar in the foreseeable future, and that curtailment issue I referred to about 10 minutes ago, with that level of curtailment, 79.2% it was on the 1st of September. So 79.2% of solar is going down the drain. So, of course, if that could be used or stored and then used in the evenings or when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining, of course, that would help bring the power costs down. But that ain't going to happen anytime sure, because the technology to store those levels of energy doesn't exist economically at this time.
Yeah. Now, you've got here what's this Yorkshire's?
Yeah, this illustrates the height of madness. By the way, I was born in Yorkshire, not far from this power station, and this was the largest coal-fired power station in England, and it's built in a coalfield. And whilst some coal in the UK is very, very dirty, high sulfur content and so forth, and very polluting, this coalfield was the cleanest coalfield in England. But the powers that be decided they would not continue to burn coal to generate electricity at the station. In fact, last week, England closed, or the UK closed their last coal-fired power station last week. So they decided to generate, to change the fuel for this power station. And what they do, the 70,000-ton freighters come from Newfoundland in Canada and Maine in the United States. They chop down trees, the forests. They chip them, put them on these 70,000 tonners, chug across the Atlantic burning marine fuel, which is very polluting, get near Whitby, where Captain Cook hailed from. There's a dock somewhere near there, and they unload them onto trucks, which are burning diesel, and take them 80 kilometres to the power station, load them on the power station, burn the output, and the CO2 that's coming up the chimney is far higher than the coal was in the same fuel, the same area that still exists. The coal's still there, but it doesn't count to their English output or the UK outputs of CO2 because the energy is imported from another country. This shows the total absurdity of what's going on around the world as far as renewable energy is concerned. I can't find any better example.
I don't even know what to say to that. That's just insanity.
It's almost like me saying Snowy 2.0 won't produce 1 megawatt of power. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
It just shows the ideology, and I mean, and follow the money too. That's all I can really say.
Well, that's
the only way you can somehow make sense of it all.
It's ideology and cash, and some of them are joined, by the way. Same people involved, but I think a lot of the cash, it's all driving this thing. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about gas peaking plants.
Well, we're building a number, and we need them, and they will be producing the gas. The demand for liquid LNG around the world will continue to grow over the next 30 years. So in 30 years' time, it'll be double the output of gas that's produced worldwide right now. That's 100% certain, in my view. And it will paper over quite a few of the sins in the move from coal-fire to renewables and so forth and the like. But the issue is even more critical to the point that we've got the Environmental Defenders Office, which is a federal government-funded body that's taking action against the Department of Energy or the Department of Environment, in other words, the federal government, who have approved certain projects, and the Environmental Defenders Office is taking action against them. And they were funded to the tune, I think, of 70 million, if my memory is correct, in the last budget. So this is insanity. And by the way, our lifesaver, as far as gas is concerned, is going to be the Beetaloo Basin. That's 500 kilometres south of Darwin, and that we have enough gas there to supply Australia's needs for 300 years. And that's been developed over quite a long period of time, and there's already been about $500 million spent on that project. And over the last 10 days or 2 weeks, I believe there's some environmental issue starting to sneak into that too. And no doubt the Environmental Defenders Office will probably be active again. We cannot survive as a modern economic entity without that type of gas. And by the way, Twiggy Forrest, as you might or might not know, I think it's in one of his companies, he's completing a gas import terminal in the Illawarra. And it's only months away from being operational. So he's bringing gas from somewhere else, probably US, to Australia. And it's mad. We are floating on gas. And I happen to know, by the way, in prior times, when times were good, I had quite a nice boat. And I used to go off Sydney, 10, 12 miles off Sydney on a very calm day. You see bubbles coming up out of from the ocean. And you put a jar over the top of it and you analyze it. It's natural gas. And there's a natural gas field that exists, in my view, from all the way from Port Stephens to the Illawarra, 10 k's offshore. There's a ban in New South Wales on exploring for it. Another madness.
Well, I think a lot of that is being pushed by the teals in Sydney. They don't want it, but then they're pushing for renewables elsewhere. They don't want any drilling or offshore wind farms off the coast of their electorates.
Yes, and And by the way, if you go to California, which I used to do in my working life often, and if you go along LA area and around there, you look offshore, you can see the gas being pumped off the coast. And that was 30, 40 years ago, and it's still happening to this day. And you can't get a more left-wing government, but they're still producing offshore gas within sight of the land.
Yeah.
And the like. So, and it isn't searching for gas offshore is a very safe practice. There's no pollution to any great extent involved, and it's far enough offshore so it's not seen, so it's not an eyesore to the, to the public.
Yeah. Now, the next thing is renewable energy zones. Now, we've on this podcast, I've been talking a lot about these renewable energy zones, and I've been interviewing people that live in places like the Central West Arana Renewable Energy Zone, and also I had Vicky Campion on recently, who's in the New England Renewable Energy Zone.
Sure.
What are your comments on these plans?
Well, I've been to Arana, and I have some friends who live at Mudgee. I was coming over the top up towards Wellington, and I saw this massive solar farm, utility scale solar farm being built, and I stopped. Now, it's very flat on the roadside, so I couldn't I took quite a lot of photographs, but I couldn't get enough. What I needed was a camera on a drone. And in fact, at a mining conference a few weeks after that encounter, that was only about 4 months ago, I spoke to a geologist or MD of a mining company who has the mining rights alongside that solar farm. And he said he has some very promising mineral discoveries in that area. And he's now prevented from doing further work because, of course, they built solar panels all over the area which he was interested in exploring further for mineral development. He was pretty annoyed about that.
Now, Alan, you're in trouble from John. He says it's not a farm; it's an industrial factory.
I will wash my mouth out as soon as I come off this podcast, John.
But we do fall into that trap, don't we? That we use the language. We
do, I have to get my nomenclature sorted. Old habits die hard, though.
It's hard. I catch myself calling them farms all the time, especially when you're deep in thought. It just comes out, but they're certainly. They're certainly not, because they're taking up precious farmland in a lot of these cases, especially. I mean, the Central West Arana is a clear example of that. So
yes,
it's a big mass, and of course, as you can see on the map in Alan's presentation there, I mean, these areas take up a lot of land. If you go on the Energy Co website, they describe these renewable energy zones as modern day power stations. Now, the Central West Arana one's 20,000 square kilometers. The one in the New England area is 15,000 square kilometers. I don't have the numbers for the Southwest Renewable Zone, but that's by far the largest. So,
yes,
Lord only knows what that one will be. But I mean, people in the cities don't realize that this is happening out in these communities.
Well, in one of my presentations, I've got a line: out of sight, out of mind. And this is a problem that's somewhere else. This 10,000 kilometers of new power lines, by the way, and some people are talking about 38,000. And I've tried to trace through the various maps that are available and try and determine what is the correct figure. But I've used 10,000. But the farmers are not going to sit down and take it on the chin. They are not going to allow this to happen. And of course, in a tight, all elections in Australia are moderately tight, and they are going to influence the outer Western sub-Sydney seats and the outer seats of Melbourne and so forth, and they're going to become quite a very vocal voting bloc, and they're going to impact this thing. The other thing, of course, which is important, I do talk about the interconnectors. It's obviously advantageous for Australia to put interconnectors in so the power can be moved around the country to where it's needed, particularly if we get very vulnerable and we get power outages and so forth, if we can move the power to where it's needed to plug gaps, it's pretty critical. So I'm very happy to put these interconnectors in, but to bring all that power from these huge zones, which potentially is productive farmland in some instances. I mean, the one near Wellington, which I observed, they had sheep on the adjacent paddock. It looked pretty arid type stuff. You probably wouldn't grow crops, but they're going, I'm not a farmer, so I don't really know.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so the next thing you bring up is opportunities. What do you mean by this?
Well, opportunities. The world needs a large amount of new critical minerals to fund this move to renewables worldwide. And Australia are very fortunate to be blessed with most of the minerals that are needed. So we've got a great opportunity there. And if you look at in that the world market, the top six critical minerals, and in my book, these tables are all taken out of my book. You can see Australia is on the top left. It goes across there, and you can see the darker the blue, the more abundant is the our source of our in the ground source of those particular minerals. And I'm talking about lithium, cobalt, copper. Graphite, which is, by the way, in an EV battery, graphite has 55 kilograms on average of graphite is used. It's the most plentiful mineral in most EV battery setups. And then, of course, we've got nickel and we've got manganese. Those are the six ones that are critical. And, of course, then we've got a number of rare earth elements as well that are quite critical. Now, Australia are fortunate to be well endowed with all of those. Some years ago, it wasn't thought Australia had any graphite, but we've now got 3 or 4 projects that are under development and are quite sizable. And in fact, they are talking about getting to the point where they can build up the anodes to cathodes in Australia. So they want to take the material, process it further, because you get 100 times more value by processing the material further into closer to an end product. And the government are spending money to do that with their future manufacturing strategy. And if you're very selective about what you do and don't take an absolute punt on it like they have done with hydrogen, you might come out with good answers and good results and more jobs and good earnings.
Now, we're so blessed with everything. We have no reason to be importing energy from anywhere in the world. And when I say that, I mean importing solar panels and wind turbines and those sort of things. We have everything that we could ever want in this country. We should be energy independent.
I'd like to take issue with one comment you've just made. We cannot produce economically in Australia PV solar panels. They're talking about spending $1 billion to do something in the Hunter Valley. It won't happen, in my view. The cost to do it in Australia, all the time, the cost of solar panels has been dropping. And it's been dropping, and it's squeezing the European manufacturers out of the market. It's squeezing the Yanks out of the market. By the way, average wages in America are a lot lower than the average manufacturing wages in Australia. So, and the process, whilst it might be fairly well automated, China have got the stranglehold on the raw materials or on the processed raw materials. So it ain't going to happen.
Well, no, what I was more saying was, we're taking our coal, our cheap, reliable energy and shipping it off to countries like China and India and Korea for them to burn our coal. But then we're shipping in their solar panels and wind turbines, which are intermittent energy, and they're very, expensive. That's really what we're doing. We're taking away our energy independence. We should be burning that coal here and using that coal here. And same with uranium and whatever, if we want to move to nuclear energy.
2 comments. I woke up this morning and as soon as I woke up lying in bed, I turned on the radio and I was listening to Ben Fordham. And he was interviewing some guy with an American accent. And I missed the first part of the discussion. But the guy said there's 551 coal-fired power stations being built now around the world. So that's the first thing he said. And he said a number of other things that were also quite pointed, you know. But we can't build solar panels economically in Australia, in my view. We can to a lesser degree, but not to get into the mainstream, because you need capital costs down and labour costs down to try to get to the cheapest possible output for the householders and industry.
Now, the next slide you've got is the US Inflation Reduction Act and the EU Materials Act. What's all this about?
Well, this is to try to break the reliance for strategic regions from sourcing processed material, critical minerals from China. And the US government have been forking out very large amounts of money, and there's I think five examples shown on that slide. There are now another 5 or 8 companies that have received money, Australian ASX quoted companies, from that act to build processing or refineries in America, preferably, or in Europe, or in Western-friendly countries. And to be the companies have to have minimal or no Chinese ownership. So that is a big incentive. Now, if there's a change of president in America, I don't know quite what's going to happen with that, with those contracts. They've obviously probably already entered into, and they're firm and holding. But the other thing on that slide, it shows 3 manufacturers of auto manufacturers. And Ford, almost all the major auto manufacturers are now buying shares in mining operations to ensure that they can get access to the raw materials that can be then further processed, so they can use them in for EV batteries and for other purposes.
The next slide, I haven't come across this one. You're going to have to really explain this one. Virtual power plants. That sounds very technical.
Well, it is a little, but what around the world, and by the way, there are a number of virtual power plant trials going on in Australia. They've been going on for over 12 months, probably over 18 months, and maybe even as long as 2 years. And some of the big power wholesalers, and by the way, I'm not tying them in specifically, but companies like Origin and Energy Australia and those type of companies, they've been trialling virtual power plants to the point they take the output off the roofs of houses via the battery storage in the homes. And in times when you've got your battery in the home is fully charged and you're not charging your EV, that power then can be provided to the grid, and it's called V2G. It's called vehicle to grid. And then there's also the home to the grid. So they're not only will they take power out of your car, which is fully charged at home during the night, and they'll take some of that power off you, and they'll take the power, as I said, from the batteries, which are storing the rooftop power. And so when you start to aggregate this over a large area with thousands of users, you've got a new power station. Basically, that's what that boils down to. And they're going to sell that power back to you, which is the power you've actually generated. Now, the other problem in there, I also made a line in there that the tariff that they were providing people for other words, what they were paying you for your excess power that you don't use, they've reduced that significantly. So it's far less attractive, and therefore you don't rely on. So they're almost going to steal this power from you over a period of time, and the like. By the way, another by the way, which is expected to happen when EV batteries expire, they've still got many years of life in them outside of an EV or outside of a car, and there's going to be legislation likely in countries in the future, probably including Australia, where they're going to get those batteries repackaged, and they're going to go into home battery storage from taking power from the roof. And they're going to legislate for that to happen, in my view. But that's some years down the track, and that will then become yet again, source of energy for a virtual power plant. So a lot of things happening.
Mate, the further you go down this rabbit hole, you just find stuff that just...
And that's why, can I say, why people should buy my book, because I talk about all this thing in the book.
Yes, I agree.
Which is unknown by most people.
Yeah. Okay, this one, snippet 3. You're talking about nuclear power plants now.
Well, obviously we've had Lucas Heights producing for down, that's 30 kilometres from where I am in Concord. And that's where Addy Patterson, who you mentioned at the introduction, was the CEO, and a very fine one at that. They've been producing and making radioisotopes for medical treatment, and I've had that treatment for isotopes from that facility in my own life, where I had my cancer some years ago. But people don't realise that we actually started building a nuclear power station in Australia. And in fact, the snippet 3, I ask my audience when I'm talking to an audience, where is it? And some smart people say Jervis Bay, which is actually was part, and I think still is part of the ACT, even though it's down, 180 kilometres or whatever it is, south of Sydney. And the photograph there you can see amongst the bush, those are the concrete footings for that nuclear power station that was going to be built. But Billy McMahon became the Prime Minister, I think in 71 or 2 or somewhere around before I came to Australia. And he wasn't a nuclear, even though he was a Liberal, he was not a nuclear fan, and he canned it. And it was another reason why he canned it, because gas had just been discovered in Bass Strait. And he said, why do you want to have nuclear when we've got this massive amount of gas that we've just discovered? So it was canned. So we've tried before and stopped. We shouldn't stop next time.
Yeah, we seem to have missed a few opportunities. I mean, as I said, we're blessed with the resources that we have in this country. We're not so blessed with some of the political decisions, unfortunately.
Yeah,
but,
I agree.
This is your next slide. Risk abatement.
This is the most important slide in the whole set. Australia's energy transition. We cannot afford to fail. Should we fail, the consequences are dire. As we have seen in Germany. Germany, we're going to close the nuclear power stations, close all the coal. We're relying to some degree from gas and oil from Russia. And of course, that went belly up when the war in Ukraine started and so forth. The failure gives us uncompetitive electric prices, insufficient and unreliable supply, loss of industry and jobs. National security is absolutely compromised. At the moment, by the way, we by law are supposed to keep, I think the figure is 90 days worth of fuel in Australia, federal law. And I think we're running at something like 29 days. So 29 days of normal petroleum use, oil use and petrol use, which we import from Singapore or Korea in the main, and where it's refined. And 29 days of trying to put a ring around Australia. In 29 days, they could come and pick up the keys because the country just couldn't defend itself. So it's a national security issue, and our insurance policy is to replace the 20 gigawatts of coal fire that is likely to come out of the system or will come out of the system by 2038. By the way, the other thing I heard on the radio while I was waking up this morning is that the ANZ Bank wouldn't give a guarantee to the Delta Energy power station, coal-fired power station. That's just the other side of Gosford on the way to Newcastle. And they didn't want money. They just wanted a bank guarantee for some millions for some aspect of what they were doing. And all the banks had knocked, all the top 5 or 6 or 7 had knocked them back. This is insanity. So that power station might come off stream earlier than anticipated. And I can't, it's in my book, I'll tell you when it's going to come off stream. I can't remember the precise figures because we've only got 18 that are still working out of the 30 odd we had 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But we need to use all the power sources available. That's solar, wind, hydro, batteries, perhaps hydrogen if it gets going, and nuclear, plus gas firming, and improve gas battery storage to provide the best possible energy answer for the country. and it can be done. Nuclear can start providing by the mid-30s that nuclear energy to give us baseload power.
So, look, I mean, the coalition policy under Peter Dutton's leadership is to move to nuclear. So it has at least sparked the debate about nuclear energy in this country. One of the things they talk about is that it's Chris Bowen's always talking about how expensive it is, and then they talk about how long it would take for it to happen. You've got this slide here which addresses those points. What do you have to say?
Okay, I have that one, how to build it on time and on budget. And by the way, the example that he doesn't like using, and by the way, in this presentation set, I have some more slides that he uses all the time to support his argument, and they do support his argument. But the reason why they've had these huge cost overruns and time overruns is quite well known and documented. You can build nuclear power stations on time and on budgets by doing 5 things. You do not take up a new design. In other words, you use nth of a kind, something that's been proven. It's been built 8 or 10 times before, and you build exactly the same, and you do not change from that design. No fancy new ideas, just build it. You let the reactor vendor do their job without interference. And as I said, you don't have good ideas that come up later, and you mitigate the risks at the outset by way of contractual stuff. And by the way, Australia already has a fairly robust regulatory framework for nuclear. It's unknown by most Australians that we are members of international nuclear safety committees and the like. And we're also working on the design of a Generation 4 nuclear power station. We've got people at ANSTO that are on those committees internationally. So we've got we're far more advanced than people say we can't do it. And we can do it. In the UAE, in April this year, the 4th of their new nuclear power stations came on stream. It's built by the Korean Electric Power Company in Korea, from Korea. They built them. They built many in Korea. And by the way, I saw yesterday, the Korean government have just approved 2 new, similar, exact same copies, 2 new nuclear power stations to add to the many they already have got. The contract for these ones in the UAE was signed in 2009, by the way. And the first, they built 4 modules, four reactors. The first one came on hand in 2012, and it was completed by 2018, and so forth and so on. They cost $20 to $25 billion, and that in Australian dollar terms is $7 to $9 billion each. I heard on the radio this morning a politician say that nuclear in Australia is completely unaffordable. It's going to cost mega dollars. And Bowen used a figure from memory of $368 billion to build 71 SMRs at present existing sites around Australia. And he was contradicted the next day at that Financial Review conference in Sydney by the Vice President of Westinghouse, said, we'll build you those 71 power stations, have them running by 2033, and we'll charge you $1.5 billion Australian dollars each. And by my count, that works out to about $100 billion, not $368 billion, as Bowen has suggested. And by the way, I've been reckless enough to put a plan together as far as what we do need, and my figure comes to $92 billion as far as nuclear power is concerned. And we could have that all running by 2040, and we will start with SMRs and cover some of the gaps as far as baseload power with SMRs, and those ones you could have running by mid-2030s. So it can be done. You just...
So these are the SMRs. Your book, does your book go into detail about
one chapter, 15 pages, 20 pages, or whatever? It talks about them, and it also talks about the micro modular reactors, of which there's already 100 on order around the world, with one company having 51 orders. And as I mentioned earlier, Rolls-Royce got their first firm order in the last 10 days from the Czech government for their plant. And by the way, Rolls-Royce business plan calls for 5 of their reactors to be sold into Australia. And another interesting little tidbit, the federal government recently sent $2 to $3 billion of our cash to Rolls-Royce in the UK as our part of the new nuclear propulsion system for the next generation of submarines. So that's not well publicised. But on the one hand, the Labor is saying no nuclear until they announced this thing yesterday about this new inquiry. But we've just sent $2 to $3 billion. It's difficult to get any closer than that to help design of the new propulsion for the UK, US submarines that will replace the existing UK and the US submarines.
Now, the Kahuna on Rumble says, I have come over to Rumble as it appears the powers to be don't like some of the things being said. So it appears that some people that were watching on Facebook have had their stream play up a little bit. So maybe you're putting out too much truth or what they may classify as misinformation, Alan.
Can I say that everything in my book has been sourced from the most reliable sources I could find. And in fact, almost all the data has been checked from more than one source. And quite a lot of it in the book is referenced directly. You click on the link if you've got the ebook. It takes you direct to the website where the data's come from. You can go and verify it yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
Not everything, because otherwise the whole book would have been half references and only half words. And as it was, I planned on having a 300-page book, and it's 493 pages.
Yeah. I mean, this is a massive issue. So I think a lot of everyday voters just don't want to hear about it because it's too technical and they can't keep up with it. But we need to talk about this stuff because we're going down a very dangerous path. Now, you talk about nuclear risk abatement. What can you say about that?
Okay. In the book, I talk. There's a whole chapter about nuclear waste and the risks and all that type of stuff. I covered that pretty thoroughly. The issue is we've had 3 well-known events over the last 50 years or 70 years. We've had Fukushima, and I've actually been to Fukushima before the problem there, by the way. So I have been to that site, and that thing killed no one, that situation. And sure, a lot of people had to be evacuated from the area and are still not returned. But if they had built a higher seawall, they built the wall 14 meters, I think, from memory, and the tsunami came up to 20 meter, came over the wall. But that wouldn't have been a problem either. But they put their emergency diesel-powered generators in pits below sea level, and these pits filled up with water, and they didn't have power to keep the pumps running, and therefore they had a bit of a thermal runaway and the like. And also, people might remember there was an explosion, blew the top off the plant. That happens because hydrogen is generated in this situation, and every nuclear power station in the world has been retrofitted since Fukushima with special equipment to make sure that hydrogen is vented to the atmosphere, and it will never happen again. It will never blow up like it did at that situation. And the similar situation in roughish terms could apply to Chernobyl. And the other one, by the way, was 3 Mile Island. And it's really interesting to see that Microsoft have just spent $1 billion in the last month signing a contract with another company, I think it's called Constellation Energy, to upgrade one of the reactors, which was being closed for 10 years at 3 Mile Island, to produce power for the Microsoft data centers, which are massively massively demanding, power.
And that's what Bill Gates is saying, that with the energy demands of AI, the only way to power that is through nuclear energy.
That's right. And one of the interesting things, there's a company called NewScale who are the most vocal and leading SMR manufacturer in the US. They had a an order for a series of the SMRs from Idaho municipalities, and they were going to be the first one installed, and they were approved by the American Atomic Energy Commission. And what happened as inflation after COVID and so forth, the price ran away to the point that that order was finally cancelled because they thought they couldn't get more economically priced electricity from that system. Quite a setback, and Bowen has used that to say the order was cancelled and so forth. However, what's happened since that same design of SMR, the data center, there's a company bought 10 or 12, I can't remember the exact figure, to be installed by 2032 or 33 to power their new data centers in the USA. So it didn't take long to find a new buyer who's happy to pay what has to be done to do that.
And the main point with Fukushima and Chernobyl and also 3 Mile Island is their technology from bygone eras. I mean, nuclear technology.
That is true. I mean, obviously Fukushima was not all that old, but 3 Mile Island and Fukushima was Generation 1 nuclear power stations, and the like. And the other issue regarding this safety issue, nuclear waste is a non-issue. Storage on site for many years. Nuclear waste is stored on site for many years, when a lot of the nasties like strontium and cesium and so forth, which are very fairly short life, nasty radioactive substances or elements, those decay quite quickly, and they are kept on site at the nuclear plant in huge swimming pool type storage facilities, and then are moved to hard storage on those facilities before they're subsequently taken away with the uranium, which obviously has a very long half-life of tens of thousands of years. I think it's 28,000 years from memory. They're then stored elsewhere. And by the way, that is a business opportunity, and I talk about it in my book, to the point that South Australia did a Royal Commission on the fuel cycle, nuclear fuel cycle, in 2015. And they looked at the possibility of building in the middle of Australia, where, by the way, we have 25,000 barrels of nuclear waste from the Maralinga atomic bomb testing from the 50s. It's stored at Woomera, and we could build there an underground massive facility, like is just recently being or about to be opened in Finland, to store nuclear waste. It's a massively attractive business.
And Bob Hawke used to talk about this.
It's a massively attractive business. And I've looked at the numbers, and I looked at detail at the Finnish one. And by the way, the name is beyond me. It's spelled Finnish. It's spelled with too many I's and L's and T's. I can't pronounce it. But I've looked at it, and the viewers should go and have a look. Google nuclear fuel repository Finland, and see some of the videos, and they'll be amazed. Hugely successful business.
And of course, whether we like it or not, I mean, we're heading towards a nuclear program with AUKUS. So
100%. And it is demanded that we build, part of the contract, we build a repository in Australia to store the nuclear waste. Now, that won't happen for 25 or 30 years after we receive if we receive new nuclear submarines. Should we take second-hand submarines, which is likely, the Virginia-class submarines from the US, if we do get those, then, of course, they've already, part of their life is already, the nuclear fuel has already been expended, because those nuclear submarines in the main are fuel for life. So when they come to near the end of their life, that fuel has got to be stored. And Australia are required by that contract to have that waste dump available.
Yes, I mean, it just seems that we're moving in this direction. So how long can we resist it? It's only being resisted by political ideology at the moment. Basically, and
can I say, by the way, there's another a very major thing I should bring to your attention. On the nuclear risk abatement slide, I talked there about the nuclear waste, the waste repository at Kimber. That's in South Australia. By the way, every day there's low level nuclear waste generated in hospitals, and there's medium level waste generated in industry. A lot of Isotopes are used in various industrial processes, and those nuclear sources have got to be stored when they be decommissioned. And there was to be some hundreds of millions was put aside in the federal budget for some years to build one in South Australia. And Kimber was the site that was selected after the Australian Election Commission did a survey of the potential towns that were interested in having that site built in the council area. Kimber was the one selected, and a person has subsequently objected, and the federal government have decided not to go to court to try and challenge them to overcome the nuclear. So all around Australia, there's nuclear waste, low-level nuclear waste and medium-level nuclear waste, building up until such time as we have such a thing. We have to have it. And that would have given 270 people, of which probably 200 or more would be Aboriginal people who have got little employment prospect in the neighbourhood. And they'd be trained to do those jobs. It's insanity.
Now, before we even get to nuclear energy, we have to keep going down the path that we're currently going down. You talk about this in your book. Can we keep the lights on?
I do. And I say possibly not. By the way, there's a chapter on this in my book, and 15 pages or whatever it is, and I go through state by state looking at the prospect of keeping the lights on. And by far the most vulnerable is Victoria. And they've had a very anti-gas stance in recent years, to the point you can't put electrical appliances into new homes or have gas plumbed to new homes and so forth. And they've also had moratoriums against exploring for gas and so forth and so on, even though they recently, a few months ago, they did provide in the Otway Basin, offshore exploration for gas, even though there's some there's some agitation against that developing. If we lose Auroring Power Station, which has been maintained has been contracted by the New South Wales government to stay open for a few more years, if we don't have that, we up the creek by the paddle. That's the biggest power station in Australia. That's 2880 megawatts. That's just huge. And by the way, 12% of the output of that and Bayswater Power Station, which is just outside Lithgow, 12% of that power is used by Tomago smelter. So when we have a power shortage with air conditioning running hard in summer, our EMO phone up the Tomago smelter and say, can you turn down the energy going into your smelting pots? And they're about almost half a kilometre long. It's a huge entity. And they drop their 12% usage maybe down to 5 or 6 for some hours to get New South Wales past the critical phase. Otherwise, the lights would go out in New South Wales most summers. So that's how thin we are on the ground. So it's quite serious.
It's extremely serious, and I wouldn't even know if the general population are even aware of how serious this is. And I feel like everyone should be reading this book that you've written so they can understand this whole situation.
Well, it does bring these things to attention. And by the way, I don't make a lot of judgments in the book. I've made more judgments talking to you today in discussion, perhaps, than I have in the book, because I try to be neutral. I try to present the things in a factual way as best I can ascertain the facts.
But this is so you've got this slide here, your final thoughts and actions. Do you want to expand upon what you've got here?
Well, by the way, I've had a very large, in my last paid position, I spent 10 years running a peak industry body, a small one. And I was in Canberra the last 5 years. I was in Canberra once a week for almost 5 years. I know how the bureaucracy works in Canberra. I know it extremely well. And in those days, the bureaucrats were there to make their ministers look good. That situation has, in fact, changed somewhat. It's bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy, more so than was the case when I was going there. And it is really, it really is an issue. I've just lost my train of thought, the question you asked, sorry.
I will bring up the final actions and thoughts.
Oh, yeah, the final actions here. So, final thoughts. So, and I was of the view that we should have a Royal Commission to investigate the choices available to Australia. They had one in 2015 in Adelaide. It was very comprehensive and covered very many interesting issues, and the report's many hundreds of pages long, which I've read. And because this issue of the interference, we need technologists to be involved in this loop to make the decisions. We need engineers to make the decisions. We don't need politicians of whatever political party to make decisions. We need people who know what they're talking about. And therefore, I call for a Royal Commission. Now, we all know that no government starts a Royal Commission unless they know what the outcome's going to be. So we're not going to get one.
Yeah.
But we need to remove the nuclear bans. We need to fix this poles and wires. And then I've got somewhat lesser important events, but that's all covered in a 20 or 30-page chapter in the book.
Yeah, okay. So you've also got here some of the political issues.
Well, can I say this presentation is going to be used for a meeting with a political party down the track. So without saying more about that, but if you start looking at what happened in Germany, and how Germany and now BMW are looking at moving their manufacturing of their cars to partially or wholly to other countries, because the energy costs in Germany are so prohibitive that and in fact, I've got a table which is out of reach. It's on the other side of my table. I can't reach it, and it's probably too small for the viewers to see. But it shows they're the third or fourth highest cost in Europe. German energy costs. Belgium is somewhat higher than theirs, and they're cutting their own throat by they're bowing at the green ultra of CO2 emissions and the like. And if you compare that against Finland opened a new passive. It's the first European passive nuclear reactor. In other words, it runs without human intervention, and anything that goes wrong, it fixes it or shuts it down and whatever. It's the first major one in there. And since they've introduced that to the grid, the energy prices have gone down dramatically.
Yes, yeah.
Now, and the like.
The last slide that I want to focus on before we wrap up is this one here. You say no advanced economy can prosper without baseload power. So this is what it all comes down to, right? We need to shore up our baseload power supply.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I did refer to this curtailment issue, and that's why it's written in red. It's our Achilles heel. The renewable a lot of the renewables that are being generated cannot be used. And there's two facts that I solicited just recently. And as I said, by the 1st of September, the national energy market curtailment reached 79.2%. In other words, the power was wasted. And imagine if that power could have been used, the transfer of that power to consumers would have dropped the power prices. But we're not able to use it because we don't have adequate battery storage. And sure, we're building more battery storage all the time, and the technology is getting smarter. But I also make the point that we've had 2 or 3 battery fires, 2 significant ones in Australia. One was in the Lower Yang Valley with Elon Musk's one of his first batteries down there. We had another one that was part of the pumped hydro in central northern Queensland. The Genex plant, which is now owned by the Chinese or Hong Kong interests.
Now, I'm sure you've only scratched the surface of some of the issues that you cover in the book, so I do suggest everyone to get a hold of Alan's book. You can head to his website, firstly. I mean, it's ausenergycrisis.com.au. Learn more a little bit about Alan. It's got some of your other interviews on 2GB and other places as well. So the website is the first port of call, but also head to Amazon. That's where you can get the book. And it's also got copies of your previous books as well, which, as you said, the 3 books on prostate cancer,
Yes.
which were international bestsellers. So that's all on Amazon. And I will. You'll also be at the Cronulla Forum on Sunday. I'll be getting a copy of your book there. So I do encourage everyone, please get a copy of Alan's book. I think it's very comprehensive. You've seen by his presentation today how much research and reading and everything that's gone into writing this book. And look, Christmas is coming up.
Exactly right.
Buy it as a present for some of your friends, or maybe even if you know some children that are in high school or something like that. Put it in the hands of different people.
Just a brief comment. Over 100 bookshops had the book as it originally came out. The book has now been upgraded, and in fact, I'm moving away from bookshop distribution for a number of reasons, which are not appropriate to go into here. One of them is I only make $2 or $3 per book sold in a bookshop, but it is on Amazon. Those books on Amazon are the upgraded version that came available in July. I am offering those books direct to anybody interested for myself. I'll post them to them. And I'm also talking extensively at Probus clubs and all sorts of service clubs on this subject. So if you're a Probus club member and you want me to come and talk to your Probus club if you're in Sydney, I'm interested to hear from you. Ideal Christmas present, as you have said, Stephen.
Yeah, no, I think it's important, especially for the kids, because they're getting so indoctrinated and pressured into believing certain things, and they need a counter narrative to a lot of the stuff that's being pushed upon them, whether it's in schools or universities or in the media or elsewhere. So books like this one that Alan has written could change the whole perspective of a young person out there and other people as well. And we need to do that, because as you say, the title of the book, it's a looming energy crisis that we have here in this country, and we have a chance of possibly turning it around, but we have to act very, very quickly. We can't continue to go down this path. Would you
agree entirely? I agree entirely.
Yeah. Well, look, Alan, thank you very much for coming on today. It was a pleasure to meet you at Guildford, and I'm also looking forward to seeing you in Cronulla. As I said, if you want to come to the Cronulla Forum, it is the Save Our Coast free information session. You can head to Eventbrite to secure your ticket, but basically it's this Sunday, October 13 at midday. It's at the Cronulla RSL Club, so head down there. The tickets may sell out. They've only got a venue that can only sit a couple of 100 people. So best way is to secure your ticket on Eventbrite. I'll have the link in the show notes for that. And come and meet Alan. If you want to speak to him face to face, get a copy of his book. But if you can't make it to Cronulla, as I said, head to the Amazon page, and I'll put the link in the show notes for the Alan's Amazon page as well. But mate, thank you for everything you've done. I think you do what you have done is important work, in my opinion. And I've even learned a few things today in listening to you. So I really appreciate you coming on, and thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed it, and I hope your listeners or your viewers have enjoyed it as well.
Yeah. And I say to the viewers every single time, please share this interview, any way that you can. It is incredibly important. We do rely on our audience to share these podcasts out. I can't do it all on my own. I'm not very good with social media, and I'm also very time poor as well. So if I can enlist your help and support to do that, it would be much appreciated. But until next time, thank you very much for watching, and we'll talk to you all soon. See you later.